Hey everyone, this is Fabio and welcome back. Today we're going to do another anime related video. I know my latest video was about anime, it was my top 10 anime movie list, which go check it out if you haven't. I think it's interesting. Especially let me know if you watch it, what are your favorite anime movies. But other than that, as I said multiple times, or at least quite often, my channel is not exclusively about video games. It's about my hobbies, and anime, of course, it's one of my favorites. Together with video game and movies, anime, it's up there as one of my favorite things to do. And I have the inspiration, you might say, to do this video yesterday, actually, when I was listening to an episode of the Lords of Thunder podcast with the always awesome Alpha Omega Sin and Johnny Millennium, Happy Console Gamer, and they were talking about anime, because I don't know why it took me so long to not discover, because I knew about it, but to finally listen to this. I always postponed this. Oh yeah, there is the Lords of Thunder, I have to listen to it. Finally did, loved it, of course, because I love really much. I'm a big fan of both Johnny and Alpha. And they were talking about anime. So I was like, oh, I cannot wait, because I know that Johnny is hugely into anime, especially old school ones. And I knew, but not as much, not as well, that also Alpha is a huge anime fan. And it made me so happy to think, knowing that, interesting enough, we actually had very similar tastes in anime. I mean, all the things that he mentioned, I was like, oh, good choice, excellent. Like, do you remember this? I was like, yes, I do. That was really, really cool. I was very proud of myself. And basically, that episode starts with Johnny asking Alpha, what's the first anime you remember watching? Now, while they were talking, I was thinking about it. I was like, I cannot remember the very first one that I watched on TV, because we're talking about series in this case, not movies. With movies would be maybe a bit easier, but I decided since yesterday evening, I was thinking about it and said, what are some of the first anime that I watched? Because as I said, I was pondering about anime, and I remember a bunch, actually, that might consider altogether the first anime that I can remember. Because the interesting thing is, when I think about my childhood, for the most part, basically, it's watching animes, playing video games, hanging out with my friends, and doing these things together. So, living the good life, you might say. So I started to think about it, and I remember watching that before, you might say, like mainstream animes, because of course I was born in the mid-80s. Of course, I'm not as old as sometimes I say, like back in the days or something like that. I'm not that old, even though when I read or hear certain things, it makes me feel old. But I was very young in the late 80s. But I still remember started to watch some animes, not complete series, but episodes, multiple episodes even, and started to watch regularly towards like 89, 90, 91, that period, 92, so I was very young. But as I said, my childhood, I remember watching cartoons, awesome cartoons, such as Droopy, Tom and Jerry, the Pink Panther. You remember the Pink Panther cartoon? I loved that as a kid. The Looney Tunes, of course. Disney, doesn't need even to say Disney. Also stuff like the Transformers. I've never been into G.I. Joe. Never really watched that. I remember He-Man. I loved He-Man as a kid. It was fantastic. Thundercats, the Turtles, of course. Do you remember there's this show with dinosaurs, Dino Riders? Do you remember that? Because I thought that was phenomenal. I even had a VHS of that shit. Because I remember it was about like people riding dinosaurs, that's the title. But the cool thing was this dinosaur were all like suited up like mechas, basically, with like lasers, missiles, cannons, machine guns, or stuff like that. It was best thing ever. I still remember it very clearly in a way. Now that's how Dino Riders, that's cool. But alongside all of these shows, I vividly remember as a kid starting to watch this very weird looking, in a good way, I mean, very differently looking cartoons. Because of course, as a kid, I've no idea what anime were. I never heard of the terms back then. I called them for years Japanese cartoons. I continued at least until middle school, if not until the beginning of high school, when it started like anime. That's the term. But for ages, I called them Japanese cartoons because that's what they were for me. Because progressively, I started to noticed, understood, and knew that they were from Japan. So yeah, they were Japanese cartoons because they were not movies, so they were cartoons. They were animated. But I immediately they clicked with me because how different they were. Imagine, as I said, you're watching, as I said, Droopy or Tom and Jerry, and I love those things. But and immediately after you watch an anime, you notice the difference immediately because they're two different words, of course. But you have to understand, like when you are 3-4 years old, and after Tom and Jerry, you watch an episode of, I don't know, I don't want to say one of these titles, but let me think. What is? Well, for example, this is something I watch a bit later. But for example, Knights of the Zodiac, Saint Seiya, because that thing was hugely popular in Italy during the early 90s. I might even say, in a way, even bigger than Dragon Ball Z, almost, at least. I prefer that to Dragon Ball Z for a while. And I watched them way earlier than Dragon Ball Z. I love Dragon Ball Z, of course. But I remember that was huge in Italy. And so it was very different, but also like more serious stuff, like started to watch movies like Galaxy Express, the Studio Ghibli ones. I mean, I can talk about these things for hours and hours. Let's just go to the point here because I'm starting to go into tangents here. It's so easy for me to start talking about this because I love this so much. But so I was thinking about like very early series that I watched as a kid. So as I said, like 4 years old, 5 years old. Because I have some images in my mind about a show which I have no idea what it is. I don't remember the name. I don't remember anything. But I remember some flashes here and there. It was about mechas or something like that. It was in space. Pretty much 90% of anime. But I still remember that. And I was extremely young. It was on weird channels. Because that's also the thing. It's a curiosity. Because where I lived, and my family still lived there in Italy. Basically, we always had awful TV reception. So with regular antenna or stuff like that, we couldn't watch television, basically. And that's not a big loss. If you watch Italian television, trust me, it's awful. So I remember that where I was extremely young, I remember my dad installed, not him personally, but he made a deal with a company to install a sort of satellite antenna. I mean, ages before Sky and stuff like that. It's very cool. And I remember with those, we were able to watch TV regularly, but also very weird channel that on weird hours, especially late at night, they showed anime. And I remember as a kid, before going to sleep, watching these cartoons, and I was mesmerized by the very weird animation style, the very, for the most part, mature themes, or very like violent for a way, or just very for grown-ups, I think. I mean, this is not something that you watch as a kid in a way. I mean, I was feeling much older. I was very proud of myself. I was watching some of this stuff. Like, yeah, the innocence of a kid, you know. So, as I said, essentially, way before mainstream anime, because one last thing, as I said, and as I've mentioned a couple of times, I'm from Italy, and I grew up during the late 80s, and especially during the 90s. Late 80s, early 90s Italy, it was a total different world from today. And Is insane how different it was, for good and bad, of course. I think there were a lot of good stuff but then that have been lost today, and kids today will definitely need some of the, I'll say, common sense and wisdom of the late 80s, early 90s. But so it was a very interesting time to grow up and started to get into this culture, because I think that in some weird, and maybe it's just my own perspective, of course, because I grew up during those years, I think that anime still to this day in Italy are not as accepted or as popular as you might think. I mean, they're big, of course, because much more accepted, but I think not as much as you might think. It's different, for example, from video games and comic books. I mean, video games is hugely accepted. Basically, you're a loser today if you're not playing video games. In a weird way, things have shifted. It's upside down. But I still remember that when I was in high school, so we're talking after the 2000, you do not talk about anime in school. I mean, with your friends, yes. It depends on the friends, because even among my friends, there were some who really didn't like anime. And even to this day, I think that if you talk with someone and say that you're into anime, they're saying like, okay, but you can see the looks like, okay, that's a weird thing still, you're into that. Because I think it's considered to this day still a thing for kids, in a way. For weird kids, if you like this weird Japanese stuff. Ugh. So, with that, let's talk about, I've written down some series, including the Italian titles, but I can spare you the pleasure of hearing those. But it's interesting, just to give you an idea, I mean, because of course these cartoons were butchered by censorships, by translation, awful translations. They changed the name. I mean, it was, but we had them. That's the incredible things. I watched all of this, and I also have an honorable mention for the end. It's a gem, which, if you ask around Italy to all the people of my age, they all said they watched it and they remember it. It's interesting. But let's go with a bit of order. They're not in order like of importance, something, it's just random here. And the first one that I remember, absolutely, the translation from the Italian title translated would simply be Ken the Warrior. You might understand what I'm talking about. You know this in England, in North America, in English-speaking territories as Fist of the North Star. Or, if you're into the culture, Hakuto no Ken, of course. I remember watching this as a kid. This huge guy with all these muscles that looks like a gigantic version of Bruce Lee, going around this awesome post-apocalyptic world, killing people with his fist. You remember that? All this, I cannot do it very well, of course, but it was awesome, of course. I don't need to talk about it. It's super classic. But the interesting thing, to me, Fist of the North Star has the most, probably one of the most, let's say, but it might be my favorite opening song of that age. It's legendary in Italy. I mean, if you just go on YouTube and put like Aku no Ken Italian opening, it's phenomenal, and everybody of my age remember that with nostalgic joys. And it's like, it's so awesome that I have it on my iPod, and sometimes I listen to it. It's super classic. I remember watching this as a kid late at night because it's quite a gory show in a way. I mean, it's very, very intense stuff. Another one that I vividly remember watching when I was very young is, again, I'm giving you the translated title, which is Tiger Man, also known as Tiger Mask in England, the Taiga Masuku in Japan. This sort of, I think it's like, what about wrestling? I'm pretty sure it was wrestling. It's one of the things that I haven't watched it in like 20 plus years now, so I can. I'm sure it's wrestling, not box. No, it's wrestling, absolutely. I think I remember that there was a guy, an actual guy, a professional wrestler in Japan who actually dressed as Tiger Mask with the mask at the time. So cool. But I remember again the opening, legendary stuff of legend. It's fantastic. But I also remember it like, for the peculiar art style in a way because it's very old school, and I love this thing. It's one of the things that actually as a kid got me into wrestling. I never been too much of wrestling fan. I follow it for distinctive periods of my life. I haven't watched WWE or stuff like that in at least 10 years now. I don't particularly care, but I found it funny. And one of the things that got me into that was Tiger Mask, because it was so crazy and over the top, and it was fantastic. And in both these cases, like between the two, I always prefer Fist of the North Star. Like Tiger Mask, I watch an episode here and there, not all the night. But I remember as a kid watching quite regularly this thing. It's fantastic. The next one, it's one of my favorite as a kid. I mean, I freaking love this show. Still to this day, I want to buy the DVD because of Fist of the North Star. I think there were some of the OVAs or something, but I don't have like boxes of DVDs. With Tiger Mask, I think I liked it and it's super nostalgic, but I was like, it's not really worth buying the DVDs. But maybe if there's a movie, I never checked. If there's a movie, I might buy it just for nostalgia. But with this one, I really want to buy the DVDs, everything on DVD. I just need to find at a decent price. I forgot to check recently. And it's, as I said, it's one of my favorites out of my childhood. I remember loving the shit out of this series. And in Italy, we call this the Five Samurais. You might know this in English as Ronin Warriors, or its awesome Japanese name, Yoraiden Samurai Troopers. Troopers, yeah. Forgive my Japanese. I mean, this is the shit. I mean, I love this. I was really intrigued by the whole mythos of the samurai. And another thing that sold me on this, of course, were the action figures. I mean, oh my god. There were like this, something at least like this, action figures made of some sort of metal or something like that, with springs in the joints, so you can move the arms and the legs in very weird positions. And it was famous even I still remember the commercial that they have steel fists. Their fist is made of steel, and it was true. I mean, this thing is of steel. And I remember I had, of course, Rio, the regular one. And I begged my parents to buy me Rio with the white armor, but that was too expensive. And yeah, those things were difficult to find, and for the most part, they were very, very expensive. And I remember that figure, I played with it so much as a kid that I broke it. I destroyed it. It was the same thing with some Knights of the Zodiac figure. I remember very well. I had two. I don't even remember who they were. They were secondary characters. But I played with them so much that one was without an arm. The other one is funny. He missed his two fingers. It was just like this. It was awesome. Like I was losing all the small pieces of the armors and all this. It was a disaster with this as a kid. I lost everything, but not the main thing. I just broke them because I played with them so much. But I remember loving this show. I rewatched it at least the first season. I was watching recently the second one. It still holds up. It's a piece of my childhood. I loved this immensely as a kid. I loved it. The next one, again, I was fanatic about this series. And you might say, really? Because, I mean, it's a great classic again. How can you not love Cat's Eye? I mean, again, with Ronin Warriors, interesting enough, the opening was not memorable, at least not as much as others. Like, Cat's Eye had a fantastic opening that even my mom remembered it. That's how much I watched it and how catchy the music was. That saxophone at the beginning with the... oh, I got the lyrics during the... with the lyrics, they would say, I will not sing it, but it was very, very catchy. Let me say that. I was almost going to sing it because it's so nostalgic. And I before making this video, I was listening to some of these openings on YouTube. And I had goosebumps because I remember watching that as a 4 years old or something. And it's amazing that one day I was talking about anime with my mom, just like, do you remember the good old days? And she remembered the opening of Cat's Eye. It's amazing. But I remember I never watched all the anime. I watched a lot of episodes, but I read all the manga. And the manga is fantastic. I really, really, really liked Cat's Eye. It's a classic of those days. But again, go watch the opening in Italian. It's a lot of fun. I love that. That saxophone. I love it. The next one is funny because the title in Italian, it's basically a what the fuck, because it's Almost Magic Johnny, basically. And I suppose you're all there saying, what the fuck is that? As I was saying. Do you remember a show and a manga called Kimagure Orange Road? That's It's Almost Magic Johnny. That's how it was translated in Italian. It was massively censored as well. But I remember, again, the opening of this is legendary in Italy. It's one of the most famous, actually. Because it's curious that back then in Italy, especially during the 90s, this was a classic of the early 90s, there was this lady, she was called Cristina D'Avena. This is a gem of Italian pop culture, if you're interested. There was this lady who sang all the anime opening. It was always her. And it's a distinctive phase because before her, like anime such as like Ronin Warriors, Tiger Mask, Fist of the North Star, she was after those. So mainly the 80s anime had something else, and they were really cool. In a way, I think they were better. Animes from the 90s, with the exception, I think, of Dragon Ball Z, had nothing to do with her. It was different. Not as memorable, I remember. Oh well. But all these openings sang by her, they were actually very catchy, and everybody in Italy of my age, they remember all of these songs. And this one of the Orange Road, it's one of the most, I think, beloved one. And like Cat's Eye was the same lady, for example. But this one is very, very, very catchy, very nice. And I love Orange Road. I remember watching some episodes. Like, for give you an example, it's Almost Magic Johnny, because the main character, which I think it's, if I remember, I haven't watched it in ages. I think it's called Kyosuke or something like that, Ryusuke. Again, my Japanese is not the best, but in Italian was translated as Johnny. It's like, what? Now I don't remember like a female character. She was called like, I cannot remember if it was Madoka or Midori, one of the two, and she was called Sabrina. So it's all different, but that was part of the charm of those days. All of a sudden, like maybe if you like an anime, you read the manga, and the names were all different. I mean, what? I thought his name was Johnny, not Ryosuke or Kyosuke. So much fun. This is a super classic. This is probably, it might be the oldest one of the bunch here. And how can I not mention, this might be, I don't know, I don't think it's a weird choice because it can hardly get as classic as this one. How can I not mention, in Italian, Lady Oscar, in English, The Rose of Versailles? How can I not mention that? Because it's probably one of the oldest, because the manga is from the 70s, actually. And this was a huge success in Italy. It was massive. And it was on TV all the time, even though I was very young. I wasn't even born when this thing was done as a manga, but in the late 80s, early 90s, it was everywhere. And it has, again, a very, 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 very famous opening song, which, this is embarrassing. Before, as I said, I was listening to some of these openings before making the video. I remember the words of the Rose of Versailles opening. I mean, it's bad. I mean, it's a very catchy song again. Very extremely different from what you expect today's anime's opening. But it's also part of the charm of those days to have these amazing openings that we all remember with great fondness and great nostalgia. It's fantastic. Again, go check it out. Lady Oscar opening. You probably would. You'll just have a laugh because of how very old school it is, but it's timeless, I think. The next one, I think it's a very niche one. I don't know how many people know about this. I'm sure many does, of course, but I remember that among my friends, nobody knew this. They were all, what is that? And I'm cheating a bit because technically this is an OVA series, so a little different. But I remember this is some of the first anime that I actually bought with my own money, and they were fucking expensive, let me tell you that. I mean, it was an OVA series of 4 VHSs, and I think that each of these cost at least 50,000 lira. We didn't have euros at the time, and roughly you might say around 25 euros each. Adjusted for inflation, they were probably around 30 to 35 euros. They were extremely expensive stuff, and I loved it. I mean, the series I'm talking about, it's one of my favorite, actually. I love the manga, but when I saw in a shop that they had the VHSs, but they were so expensive, so it took me a while to get all 4 of those. I still have them somewhere in Italy, actually. Would like to bring here to London. And it's 3x3 Eyes. Do you remember that show? I think in Japan it's called Sazen Eyes. I mean, I friggin' love 3x3 Eyes. It's, as I say, it's still one of my favorite series, even as a manga. Because when I watched it, 3x3 Eyes, it's a very, very dark, mature series. It's very complex. I think I was still in elementary school when I watched it for the first time. Like last year of elementary school, first year of middle school, something like that. But I watched this way before I watched DBZ, for example. And 3x3 Eyes, it's very complex because it's all about like Hinduism, Eastern like mythology, and it's fantastic stuff. But also it's very mature because this anime, these OVAs, there's blood everywhere. I mean, the protagonist Yakumo, he got like dismembered all the time because he is an immortal, a Wu actually. Always love that in this series, the Wu warriors, who are like the guardians of Sanjian Hunkara, I think it was the term. The people, the tribe with the third eye, and the Wu warriors were the guardians, the immortals. And it's a fantastic show, but the manga is where it is actually. But the anime is super nostalgic for me. I remember watching it at my grandparents' house, and they were shocked and saying, "What are you watching? There's blood everywhere. Are you crazy?" Because I was very young. I was, yeah, I love it. It's fantastic. While like the villain of the series, Benares, was like decapitating the protagonist. I was like, look at that, it's awesome. Yeah. But I love that series. I say maybe cheating a little because it's OVA, so it was not on television, but it's super nostalgic, and it's seriously, especially the manga, but it's seriously one of my favorites. And the problem is I still haven't finished to collect that, because I really want to finish collecting that series, even though I'm not too much into mangas anymore, unfortunately. But the problem with 3x3 Eyes had a very, very complicated and troubled publication history in Italy. There was a long period when you might have one issue every 9 months. Then after a while, for like at least a year and a half, we didn't have anything. Then they started to reprint in the old series. It was crazy. And now it's done. Well, years ago, they managed to finish it, but because I think there was a slight increase in popularity, because when nobody knows about it, I mean, it was extremely difficult. It was more expensive than normal mangas. I mean, it was the weirdest manga that I ever read, but it's one of my favorites. It's really, really great stuff. Check the OVAs out of curiosity, It's a great story. It's that the OVAs, they covers the first 2 seasons, I think, roughly, because there are, or it's most of the first season. I mean, I think it's the first season actually. The second is then there's Trinetra, as it's called. Yeah, it's, I can say maybe the first season, roughly. But it's great stuff. I mean, amazing story, great, unforgettable characters for me. I mean, it's really one of my favorites, especially the manga. I cannot stress it enough. The manga is phenomenal, but the OVAs were very good adaptations, I think. Finally, as I said, an honorable mention, and just to finish this, because I can go on forever, and I didn't expect this video to be as long as this, but it's easy, as I said. I love to talk about these things. An honorable mention goes to, probably, if you ask around Italy, as I said, to people of my age, they probably all will say that they absolutely remember this series because of the opening again. I mean, they were very, very powerful. You remember more the opening than the series per se, in a way. It's interesting how it worked back then. It was called, in Italian, translated, Mila and Shiro, Two Hearts in Volleyball. Basically, it was Attacker You. And it's interesting that they say this. This was hugely popular in Italy. It was not my cup of tea. I watched it here and there, but I remember the opening as it was yesterday. Even again, my mom remembers that. And trust me, my mom is not into anime at all. But these songs are so catchy that you remember them. It's interesting. Everybody in Italy remembers this song. I mean, it's a very catchy melody, and it's stuck in your head, and you'll never get it out. I mean, I remember each of these songs very clearly, but I'm very, very fond of this because it's part of my childhood. I'll never forget, and I don't want to forget them. So there you have it, some of the earliest anime series and one OVA series that I watched when I was very, very young, before anime became mainstream, some of them way before. I mean, I've been watching anime since I can remember, in a way, and I love them massively. I still do. As I said, anime is still one of my favorite hobby, and let me know what you think. Do you remember any of these? I suppose so. Most of them now are famous, but it was interesting watching them back then when they were not famous. And finally, you meet someone, maybe at school or somewhere, that actually knew about this. Like, oh my God, you know, like, you know Tiger Mask? How awesome is that? Or something like that. 3x3 Eyes, nobody knew that. It was a very, very, very niche thing. And even like I had a friend, a very good friend in school for like elementary and middle school. We were super geeky about anime. It was always the two of us going into this weird comic book store, or DVD were not there yet, for the most part. Looking around, like VHS, looking around anime, talking about them. But it was always the two of us, and we watched them. We read manga together. It was great time. I mean, I had the fondest memories of when I was like, for these things, when I was in elementary and middle school. With high school, I started hanging out with other people because he went to another classroom, but we still saw each other very regularly because he was very big into video games. Now I haven't seen him in a while, unfortunately, because he's doing completely different stuff. And I moved to England, so. But apart from all of this, it was. I remember back then it was difficult to find people you can talk with about anime, much more than video games. I think. Like, for example, my best friend, he hates anime. I mean, it's not a problem between us, but he really doesn't like Japanese culture at all in video game anime. He really doesn't like it, so I cannot talk with him about this, even though we are really excellent friends. So it's still not for granted, I think. But anyways, guys, obviously it doesn't need a shadow, but check The Lords of Thunder. It's a great show. Awesome to hear together Alpha Omega Sin and Happy Console Gamer. But They don't need a shadow from me, of course. Yeah, let me know. As I said, what do you think about this series? What are some of the first animes that you remember? Some of your favorites? But definitely check it out. The Italian openings, they are amazing. I mean, huge nostalgia. As I say, it's a piece of pop culture nostalgic treasure. To let you know how it was in different countries. It's interesting. I mean, for example, hearing from Johnny Millennium talking about how it was in Canada, North America, let's say, in the 80s. I can kind of talk you how it was in Italy. It's a completely different market. Anyways, guys, I have to stop. I can talk forever about this shit. I love it so much. See you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.